Hey there, spooky friends, and welcome to another episode of the Scaryish podcast. I'm Robin Grace. This is Adam Diaz.
Hello.
So this week, I think we have an episode that is probably more intense than others. I know you said your topic's pretty cool, but it's tragic at the same time.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mine is 100% straight up just tragic. So hopefully you guys
So strap on,
it.
folks.
Yeah,
100%. Indeed, yeah. My topic is going to be United Airlines Flight 232. Robin, what are you going to be covering this episode?
And I'm going to be covering the murder of Sylvia Likens.
Interesting. It's a little bit late on the episode. Here's the thing: we were working on this last night, and I asked Robin like, "How much do you have?" Because we like sit back to back in our office. So I don't get to see her screen. Let's like turn around. And she said, I have 3 pages. And for you, that's like about a completed script.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, are we going to record tonight? And she was like, oh no, like I have so much more to go.
So and you know what? I actually cut out a lot.
Really?
I cut out like the entire actual legal court case part of it because I was just like,
that shit's so fascinating.
I have the end of it, the result of it
right.
and what happened after, but there's just so much that goes into it.
Is this the longest script you've ever written?
Yeah, I'd have to, yeah.
290 episodes, and you got to your longest script. That's awesome. True crime will do that to you, man. She was talking, I think Sunday or Monday, and you're like, I'm going to do true crime. Like, those topics are easy. And
no, I don't think they're easy. I just like doing them.
I was like, they just sneak up on you. You just don't realize how much they're... That's why Charles Manson, the Manson family series that I did want to be in 3 fucking episodes, And even then, people are like, you missed this book. It's like, dude, I just spent 3 weeks of my fucking life doing one topic. So yeah, they can definitely hit hard. I'm very interested to hear yours, but I think I'm going first, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you can go first, because mine's real long.
Right on. Before we get started, we did take an extra week off. Let's talk to the people. Let them know what we're up to in our lives. Not a lot. Fuck ton of work.
It's just work. Work is...
Work.
Work is tiring.
Yeah.
And we're just... Sometimes you're, having a really rough day and you're mentally exhausted and it's hard to want to do any more reading. I know I sit at a computer, 10 hours out of the day at work already, and then you're doing it all day too, and then we don't really want to sit in front of our computers for the rest of the night. So
it can get rough, honestly. I got this new position and I'm super proud and I'm very happy, and I'm looking forward to proving everyone who voted to give me this associate director position. Like, I want to make them like proud and make them think, oh, we made the right choice. But it does come with a fuck ton of extra work and something I'm excited to do. But at the same time, I still haven't hired my replacement, so I'm doing both of my old jobs because I volunteered for an extra one before, and it's just so much on some days where like when we finally get to sit down and eat and our brains are just fried, we just like look at each other. Like all we can think about is like, want sleep ? It's like, it's kind of rough.
We're not making excuses or anything. We're just glad you guys are still listening to us, and we still try to put out episodes. Some days, some weeks, we just need a break. So,
and I wanted to bring it up specifically because next week we are going to be traveling. We're going to try and get an episode in. It might be a little bit shorter of an episode. We'll see what we do with it, because we are traveling to Miami. And yeah, we're going to be out for like 5 days. So maybe we'll have an episode next week and then not the week after that, because we land on the day we normally record back in town. So we'll see how it goes. Might be a little bit dicey in the next 2 weeks, but we're going to try and get at least one episode out for you folks. So
yeah, just
wanted to set that expectation so no one's like, where the fuck's the episode? No one has ever said that, by the way. Everyone's always been super nice, like, oh, take your time. And we really, really appreciate that. It like relieves a lot of stress when we're feeling like this is hanging over our heads.
Yeah.
But
so why don't you get into it?
Speaking of hanging over our heads, we have 2 topics to get through here. So let's dive in. So this week, before I get typing, I just want to give a shout out to my D&D group really fast, because we had like a really awesome session on Sunday, and it just like energized me for the entire week. I love those guys. Shout out to you. I love you. I don't know why it popped into my head when I started writing my script, but I was just like, I'm just going to write this out here because, I just had such a good time on Sunday. Maybe it's because our D&D session started with the aftermath of an airship crash. And then I wound up deciding to do a topic on United Airlines Flight 232, which, despite not coming into combat with the dragon, also had its own issues. So strap on, folks. Here we go. Side note, why the fuck do I always cover airplane crashes right before we board flights? It happens so frequently. I'm so annoyed with myself. But before I get into this, no, we haven't covered this one before. Just in case anyone's like, I feel like you guys might have mentioned this one. It sounds slightly similar because O'Hare was involved in some way, shape, or form. O'Hare was also involved in Flight 191, which was pretty devastating. Don't get those twisted. Don't get those mixed up. These are two different flights entirely. This was a United flight, which is an airline I don't fly, so it makes me feel a little bit happy going through this. I will say Flight 191, which was deadlier, was American Airlines, which is our airline, so that's kind of scary. But hey, let's talk about Flight 232, which, in case you noticed, it's a palindrome. It's the same forward as it is backwards, and so is 191. I did check, and our upcoming flights are not palindromes, so I think we're safe there, so good news. But let's go back to 1989. Y'all remember 1989, right?
No.
I wrote yes. Okay, cool. And then I have no facts for 1989 whatsoever. Aside from it being the year Robin was born and having the things I'm about to tell you about, I'm pretty sure I've done the whole y'all remember bit for 1989 at some point in the last 290
That's when Taylor
episodes.
Swift was born too, I think.
It must be because
she has an album called 1989.
It would make sense. But back on July 19th, 1989, United Airlines Flight 232 would take to the skies. Much nowadays is made of what model plane you are flying in, because if it's the wrong one, it is very possible that the plane manufacturer would rather pay your family for dying than fix their fucking planes. But not back then. This particular plane was a McDonnell Douglas DC-1010 for our aviation enthusiasts. For our non-aviation enthusiasts, DC-10 is important, and I bring it up for a reason. Don't get mad at me. For the people who don't know what the fuck that means, it had standard 2 engines, like on the wings, like everyone's used to seeing now, but it also had a third engine that was mounted right in the fucking tail. So like the back of the plane, that fin that comes up.
A lot of private planes have that.
Yep, and it was huge. So triple engine plane. Pretty dope. The plane itself had been in circulation, flying all over the skies since 1971. And again, this story is taking place in 1989. So it was a good 18 years old already. This plane could fucking vote.
This particular plane.
This specific plane.
Okay.
This one that these people are getting on.
Okay.
Was casting its vote that year.
Okay.
Not really. It was actually the 88 election. Never mind. Anyways, it was 18 years old. And if hearing that makes you think that sounds kind of old for an airplane, you should guess how old the plane is that you most recently flew on. I'm saying that to everyone, not just Robin. If you had to guess what the average age of a plane, a commercial plane or a passenger plane, in the skies right now was, what would you guess?
I'm going to say 15 to 20 years.
It is 12. It is 12 years, yeah. And it's gone down significantly because of a lot of the newer models that are being put into circulation, most of which have fucking problems, which is terrifying.
Okay. Side note, I've just watched a lot of videos on this. It's because the people that are contracted to make these planes subcontract it and subcontract it and subcontract it, and then they're all cutting corners. Like, instead of doing a screw every single hole, they do like one here, maybe skip one, another. There's, you know what I mean?
The exact thing you want to do to a fucking device that's going to carry people through the skies, right?
So that's what's going on right now. Is there's a lot of issues with quality control.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so
There's
many
a really good
wrong.
conspiracy theory out there about, I think it was a Boeing guy who was way high up in the company, who was their quality controlled like director or VP or whatever, who had like written letters like, this plane is not fucking safe. There's going to be a lot of issues with it. And
did he die?
He died suddenly when the trial was like going to be coming up where he was going to be a witness at. He just fucking died out of nowhere.
So he got murdered.
Lots of people like they had that dude fucking killed. And some of the stuff that's come out, I mean, this is completely off topic. I guess not that far off topic, but which one is it? The 737, 747 MAX, whichever one it is that's been having all the problems with, which has had multiple crashes. When they like went to sell it, when Boeing was like getting all their investors together to like show them like the first model of it, this is on John Oliver. They had like people come out and they couldn't get too close to the plane to inspect it. And the security guards that were in charge of keeping people away from the planes were like looking up at it and being like, this thing is fucking cardboard and wood. Like, this is a model. This isn't a functioning plane. Like, you could just look up and see it. And they had literally told the people, like, this is a functioning plane. They straight up lied to everyone about it. So that's why they fucking wound up cutting corners, was to make the delivery dates after all these people had paid them billions of fucking dollars. But anyways, we're talking about 1978, this beautiful DC-10. We don't need to worry about that shit, right? Everything's fine. This plane's been going for 18 years. It's up in the sky.
Why do you say that like you're from hyped. Die Hard or something? It's like, come to the West Coast.
Get together. Have a few laughs. It's not, I mean, okay, let's just get to it because there's some crazy, horrible, tragic, but incredibly cool shit that happens in the story. I'm very excited to tell you folks about it. If you hear this, you hear it's like, okay, an 18-year-old plane, where is it going? At this point in its lifetime, it is flying out of Stapleton International Airport pretty routinely to O'Hare. It would then continue on from O'Hare to Philadelphia and then make its way back. And that was kind of the route that this plane was used to going on. Those are the three airports it was used to landing at.
I wish you guys could see Adam's hands as he's doing the airplane. It's like airplane goes here, then turns and goes here. And
if you want to make an airplane with your hand and move it twice, you've mimicked what I was doing.
And then he did like a whole circle, like, yeah.
Because it comes around and it has to come back, obviously, to Denver, Colorado. And on this day, July 19th, 1989, it was heading towards beautiful O'Hare Airport in Chicago, Illinois. Side note, that's kind of a joke. O'Hare kind of sucks. Actually, it's really nice inside. It's just, like, notorious for delays and people that run their Starbucks sucking ass at delivering a cup of coffee within 30 fucking minutes.
Bro, I'll never get that money back.
It's so annoying.
So upsetting.
Anyways, this was a trip the plane had made many, many times before, as I have mentioned. Piloting the plane was a man named Alfred Haynes, and his co-pilot was a man named William Records. I'm not sure exactly how they say it. But they were known, and this isn't a joke, their names, like, listed in the official filings had, like, quotes after it, as Al instead of Alfred, and Bill instead of William. So Al and Bill are flying this plane. They also had a flight engineer by the name of Dudley Deverek. Dudley's such a good name. Who was around 3 years into his career. Al and Bill had been around for between 20 and 30 years. Tens of thousands of hours spent in planes. Like, these dudes had flown for, you know, tons of time. All the experience you could ever want to have from your pilots.
I'm going to put this out there. They don't survive.
All right, cool.
Do they not survive?
We'll get to there.
Oh, gosh.
The wheels lifted off the runway at 2:09 Central Time, 2:09 p.m., with the passengers anticipating around 2-ish hours of flight time. I didn't check on that. I'm just guesstimating because of how often I've traveled in that same direction from LA. And it's like a 3.5-hour flight to get to O'Hare. So if you're going from Denver, I'd imagine you'd scrape off 60 to 90 minutes of flight time. So sounds about right. Anyways, about an hour into their flight, actually at 3:16 p.m., things would change. And some folks might think, 3:16, wow, what a foreboding time for something to happen, because you may associate 3:16 with one of two things. The first, of course, being a phrase popularized on signage at sporting events for like the past 40 years, which is John 3:16, which, as we all know, is a passage from the book of John. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. Pretty foreboding that 3:16 is that passage from the Bible about dying and going to heaven, because if you don't believe in him...
Okay.
Foreboding. Just saying. And if that didn't come to mind, you'd obviously associate it with the much more notable and famous Austin 3:16, which says, I just whooped your ass.
That's the one I'm used to.
Shout out to Stone Cold on the best promo of all time, that he, by the way, spun off the top of his dome. Totally improvised. Austin 3:16. And then he followed up with, and that's the bottom line, because Stone Cold said so.
Yeah, I'm used to hearing Stone Cold said so.
Made them both up on the spot. Everyone in the back was like, God damn, he's about to be a superstar.
There are some lines in wrestling that are iconic and will never die. There's that one. There's do you smell what the Rock is cooking?
Rock had such good fucking catchphrases too.
There's just so many.
Getting away from the wrestling world though, back to this incident. In whatever case you might have thought 3:16 sounded familiar, in this case, Airplane 3:16 said, your engine just fucking exploded. Because that's what happened at 3:16 p.m. in the sky. And at 3:16 p.m., Flight 232 had its tail-mounted engine fail, and it failed fucking hard. There's different ways an engine can explode or fail. I think it's called contained and non-contained. One basically means your engine explodes within the housing that giant propeller spins. Mm-hmm. And then uncontained means it went fucking everywhere and made a goddamn mess.
Okay.
This was uncontained. If you're looking for the dirty details, like someone out there that's really an aviation enthusiast, the fan disc, which is what I imagine to be what I just called the propeller, disintegrated while exploding and damaged the engine beyond use. So the engine was completely fucked. And because it exploded in the way it did, it also fucked up the supply hoses, ripped out parts of the number 2 hydraulic system, and shot shrapnel into the number 1 and number 3 hydraulic systems. If you're wondering at this moment, Adam, How many hydraulic systems are there? There's 3.
So the hydraulic systems control what? They control the wings?
All controls.
Oh, okay.
Everything you use to control an airplane is controlled through the hydraulic system. That means that the aircraft no longer had a functioning horizontal stabilizer. The pilots noticed the explosion and thought to themselves, quote, well, fuck. Side note, not an actual quote. I can't guarantee that.
You're telling me the black box doesn't have them saying,
I'd be willing to bet money that they're like, fuck, at least one point. Now, we're about to get into some harrowing shit, but I do find one detail of this pretty humorous in such a scary situation. That detail is the fact that the airplane shook from the explosion, and the first thing the pilots noticed by way of warnings, all the things that you see in like an airplane cockpit, the one thing they noticed was the autopilot button turned off.
So he's like, what the heck is going on?
No longer autopilot, which I just thought was really funny. That's like driving a car that gets hit by a fucking rocket, and your trunk explodes, it shreds your rear tires, scatters debris all over the freeway, and the only change to your dashboard isn't all the emergency lights, it's the cruise control light turning off, where you're just like, I guess it wasn't that bad. I should also mention that the debris from the explosion was scattered so much that it fell to the ground, and it was found in different cities in Iowa.
Wow.
Where it landed for like weeks after the fact. Now, at this point, the pilots started doing damage control to figure out what had happened and how figgity fucked they were. Because they weren't just like heading straight down, they still had 2 functioning engines, one on each wing. But they knew that something was seriously wrong. And if you've ever seen like a TV show or a documentary or a movie about, aviation issues, they have checklists that they're supposed to run through. If they're having an issue with a specific engine, they try and power down that engine, shit like that. And that's sort of what they go through. They also get on the radio once they begin to diagnose the abundance of issues that they're having. And in most cases at this point, the person in the air traffic control tower would start also walking them through steps that they can take to safely land, finding out where the nearest suitable runway is to have them make an emergency landing at, and going through the checklist of whatever is in the manual as it relates to the airline. In this case, the United Airlines manual. The United Airline flight manual had procedures in the event of a partial loss of aircraft control. What Flight 232 faced in this moment was a complete hydraulic failure. There was literally no procedures written for that.
Okay.
When it was found out after this event takes place, and people are like, why wasn't there any procedures written? A pilot, independent of this incident, who flew on the DC-10, remarked on how this wasn't really an oversight. It's not like they forgot to do it. He stated, this is real. Quote, we have procedures for what to do if you lose your controls, some of your controls, but nothing for a total failure. We could add a page to the manual, but we might as well write on it, good luck, end quote.
So at total failure, obviously, you can't control where the plane is going.
Correct.
How you can't pull up. There's no pulling up. There's no controls. You're just wherever it goes is wherever it goes.
So in this moment, you have realized, like, you got to kind of hope you're heading straight, So you can try
into what?
Straight forward into the sky so that you're not pointing down, which is where death is my point. All this to say, Flight 232 was really, really fucked. Essentially, they were 37,000 feet in the air. That's how high they are. And they have 0 controls, an engine that had exploded and shredded everything near it and had to be shut down, and not a single soul on Earth had ever contemplated, let alone had a clue as to what they were going to do. I might be wrong about that. We'll see as the story goes on.
Okay.
The plane was also pulling to the right slightly. So imagine like a shopping cart where it just keeps on wanting to turn right and you can't really fight it. Which meant they weren't just cruising forward. Their course was changing and they could be deviating into other flight paths at this point.
Okay.
They were incapable of correcting it. So they took the control column and they're like, okay, maybe if we just turn this thing all the way in the opposite direction. So it's going to the right. Let's turn it all the way to the left, which you should never do. And pull the column as far back as you can, which you should never do, especially in association to having your control column like tilted to a full left turn and fully inverting your plane, basically.
You're gonna spin, right?
Yeah, and nothing happened.
Okay.
So they're like, we have no control of this plane. There's nothing we can do. It's starting to pitch right. Oh, and by the way, it's starting to have its nose dip.
Because there's nothing keeping it up anymore.
So there is moments from this plane inverting like fucking Top Gun or going straight down and then just spinning on its way to a fiery death for everyone. I feel like I should have mentioned this sooner, but this plane held 285 passengers and 11 crew. So inversion's a big no-no. It's not like you and Goose can just make it through because you have your seatbelts on.
I mean, Goose doesn't make it through either.
Exactly. One of two. Just saying. 50% is not a pretty good successful survival rate.
You guys have never watched Top Gun.
That's on you, man.
It is one of the most upsetting scenes in
She gets so sad every time we watch Top Gun. It's
so upsetting.
And then the whole second movie is just about, like, reminding you that Goose died.
Bro, oh, God. It's because it didn't have to happen. It's so stupid. And then the way they filmed it, it is, It makes
it feel like the man actually died.
Oh, God.
To make you feel the sadness, which you will remember for 40 years. So that way when they make a sequel that long later, you're like, I can't wait to go see that fucking movie.
Yeah, but then
that's Goose's kid? Oh my God, I can't wait to see this movie.
But then they overkill it because it's, like, too much, like, I always remember Goose. Decades later, blah, blah, blah. I still think about
It's what my dad would have done. I'm like, whatever. Just because my eyes are sweating doesn't mean this isn't stupid. And then we saw it twice more.
Okay. We did watch the sequel.
Can we get back to the people whose lives are currently at 37,000 feet in the air? I mean, it's a paused moment in the past, but we could talk about fucking Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick all day. They're very close to inverting or nosediving. And they have a ton of people on this plane. This last-ditch effort to prevent this from happening was to cut the power to the left engine to minimum. So not just deactivate the left engine, but just sort of like rev it down. So like throttling down as far as you can without deactivating it, and then taking the other engine to maximum fucking output, maximum throttle, maximum thrust, however you want to say it. This is also something that you're warned about in all these manuals to never, ever fucking do.
Okay.
And it worked. The plane leveled out. So now they're at 37,000 feet with no control, but they're not going to flip over, and they're not going to go into a nosedive. Because the plane is level with no controls, it started to do this thing that planes will do when you have no control over it. And there's a name for the cycle that it gets into. I don't have the name. I forgot to write it down, but I will describe it to you. So if you just make your hand into that plane we were talking about earlier, just by the way things naturally work sometimes, your plane will like dip down a little bit and then come up a little bit. Like imagine like a boat sailing on waves, you know? Mm-hmm. Up and down, up and down. And that's just a natural way that it happens, especially when a plane's controls are not working.
Is that just because of airflow? And
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, usually when you have like your hydraulics, like your flaps, prevent that from happening. You sort of like keep smooth sailing along the way. But when that happens, they're losing with every cycle of like dip, climb, dip, climb. They're losing about 1,500 feet.
Imagine being on that plane and you're dropping.
Feeling it.
Yeah, you're dropping 1,500 feet so quickly.
You know who was on that plane? A man named Dennis E. Fitch, who was a passenger. And he noticed, that shouldn't be happening. And Dennis knew that because he was a check pilot, which is basically a pilot that evaluates other pilots for qualifications and safety. He was also a DC-10 flight instructor, which is why it was important for you to know this plane was DC-10. He was like, I run this bitch. I know what's up. I teach people to fly this fucking plane. In addition to those qualifications, Mr. Fitch, 4 years before this, had a little bit of an obsession because another DC-10 plane had actually crashed from severe complications, one of which being complete hydraulic failure. This one was different. It wasn't like this just happened. This was something that was really, really fucked up. This is actually Japan Airline Flight 123, which I will cover in the future because Flight 123's crash is the deadliest single aircraft accident in aviation history.
Wow.
To this day. It was horrific when it happened, and people were so shocked by it that it was kind of something that was just present in everyone's mind, including Dennis E. Fitch's mind, who, as a DC-10 flight instructor, said, I'm gonna hop in the fucking simulator and see if I can figure out a way where I could have landed that plane. And so he tried a lot of shit, all unofficially, never really writing a manual or writing up a report on how they could have saved this other flight. But he happens to be on this plane, which is 37,000 feet in the air, losing 1,500 feet every dip cycle. And he's like, well, you know what? I'm going to go to the fucking cockpit, and I'm going to volunteer to help. And he does. It's 3:29 p.m. when he does so, meaning that 15 horrifying minutes had passed since the engine had exploded. And this guy decides to go up there and ask the captain, so Al, Bill, and I want to call him Gundren.
Dudley.
And Dudley. If he can help, because this is what he does. And these dudes say, sure. And they make space in the cockpit for this dude's massive set of brass fucking balls. He checked the ailerons on the side of the plane, which are like the flaps that go up and down to control your turning, as they were like turning the wheel to try and figure out whether or not anything was working, and was like, nope, we're pretty fucked. The pilots noted that if for some reason the hydraulics were to come back based off the settings they have, they'd basically be in a recoverable spin, and they need to keep their hands on the control columns to prevent that from happening should the hydraulics kick back in. Which means that they can't really do much else but try and prevent the plane from crashing should it function properly out of nowhere. So while they're holding those control columns, Fitch was charged with controlling both of the throttles. Because if you've ever seen these massive planes, they don't just have one throttle that they throttle up, they have two, one for each engine. Mm-hmm. So Fitch has one hand on each throttle. This guy just fucking volunteers like, I know what I'm doing. And now he's double fisting the throttle on both of the engines to this plane. And because he's practiced this shit, he begins adjusting the throttles, like back and forth, to counteract the dipping and rising to help stabilize the flight.
Wow.
And he succeeds. All of a sudden, the flight starts like cruising again. And he also starts adjusting throttles to each engine so they can make steering adjustments. And suddenly, they can make course corrections. So they're like, okay, find us a runway and let's try and get there. And the only way they can make this plane turn is to turn right. And they have to continuously turn right to prevent the engines basically from getting out of whack. So they have to make full-blown circles. And then when you come out of the circle, go forward a little bit more. And then another circle and go forward a little bit more. And then another circle. So just imagine trying to walk in a straight line.
It's a bunch of roundabouts.
And you have to spin on your axis while you're doing it. While you also occasionally have to go in a straight line. Then you have to turn, making a big round arc. And then you have to go up a little bit again to make sure you're in line with the runway. And then you have to sort of line it up. And then at the last second, it's like, okay, no more turns. You have to go straight now. And that's essentially the course that gets plotted with this plane. I'm going to put up on our Instagram a picture of the course that they ran through to try and get to this runway. So after all these turns and lining this thing up with their emergency runway, they try and bring this thing home as best they could. And during this time, when they're approaching the runway, they debated if lowering the landing gear could cause any potential further issues, or if it would be better to land the plane on its belly on the runway.
I mean, they still have brakes, right?
They do. Well, in theory. So they decide, let's try and lower it. Anything is better than landing on the belly, just like full bore. And they won't lower because that uses the hydraulics. So they're like, well, shit. So there's this way that like you can gravity drop your gear, because like if you try and lower and it doesn't work, you can basically manually release.
So someone had to go down
gear.
there.
No. It's like a button in the cockpit. And then the wheels themselves rest on like the housing that like closes up over them. And then eventually those will just give way because they're meant to break away in this exact event so that your landing gear isn't trapped in your plane. You can just manually lower it, which they do. So they wind up getting this landing gear down. They get told, like, you have to make further adjustments because you're not lined up with the runway properly and you're going to miss it. So they're trying to land at runway 31 at Sioux City Gateway Airport in Sioux City, Iowa. Runway 31 was 9,000 feet long. So they thought if you land there, it's the longest one that we have that's lined up with you right now. It should give you plenty of space to slow the plane down. And if you have to slide, you should be able to slide and stop before you get to the end of the runway. But they need to course correct. So they need to do another twirl. So they twirl one more time. And as they twirl, they're starting to partially dump their fuel. I couldn't find out exactly why you partially dump your fuel in this case. I would guess so it's not like you're dropping a fucking bomb on the airport.
I think it has something to do with the weight. They're dropping a bunch of weight,
It's right? Definitely so they can control this a little bit better. But at the same time, I'm like, it also might be so that there's less chance of it catching fire when they land. But after they're done twirling and dumping their fuel, they've instead lined up, because they can't really control this fucking plane, with runway 22 instead of runway 31. Runway 22 is just under 7,000 feet long. I think it's like 6,800 and some change, which is significantly less, but in, the grand scheme of things, at least they're lined up with a runway. And this runway was really close to, runway 31, which is why they wound up lined up with it. But the plane wasn't able to make any more course corrections, so they're committed now. It's runway 22. The problem there is all of the emergency vehicles, like the ambulances and tons of fucking firefighting trucks that are there, they had parked on runway 22 so they could get to runway 31 once these guys landed.
Oof.
So in like 45 seconds, they all have to clear the fucking runway before this plane touches down. And there's like this frantic talking back and forth on the air traffic control radio where it's like, it's basically without saying it like, get the fuck out of the way. And the guys that are in the airplane are just like, yeah, if they could be gone by the time we get there, that would probably be best for everyone. And the pilots and Fitch and the engineer, what was his name again? You remember? Dudley. They're super chill. And they basically say like, we don't have an option not to be chill or else we're gonna die. And we also might still die, but this is the best shot we have. So they're approaching the runway. I can't believe we brought up Top Gun because I wanted to bring this up. If you've ever played the Top Gun NES game, landing on the fucking aircraft carrier was something I could not do as a kid. Because you have to control two specific things in order to land. One is your speed. You can't be going too fast or else it won't work. And that's the same with any runway. And specific to aircraft carriers because it's such a short runway. The other thing is you have to control how fast you're sinking. So those are things that are still in place for all planes that we're flying on today. And I looked it up. So normally you want to land going around 160 miles an hour. This is measured in knots, but I'm like, no one fucking knows knots. 160 miles an hour is about how fast you want to be going. And you want to be sinking at about 300 feet per minute. So that's what you're looking for. Flight 232, touchdown at 250 miles an hour. 90 miles per hour, too fast. And it was sinking at 1,850 feet per minute. So it was coming down too fast. This plane was falling while still moving forward very quickly. To make it worse, just before touching down, the plane basically suffered additional failure and it began to roll right before it was about to touch the ground because they had been trying to prevent this roll since engine failure happened.
Yeah.
And basically they almost fucking made it to the runway and then the plane started to pitch. And the nose pitched downwards, so they were heading straight towards the runway as it was rolling. And Fitch pushed the both throttles to full fucking power because he thought it's the only way I can prevent like complete catastrophic crash, and it might level the plane out. It was his final desperate attempt to save the plane on the people on it, and it was not enough to prevent the rolling. So the plane touched down at exactly 4 p.m. Its right wing struck first, and it started spewing out its own fuel, which immediately burst into flames. The body of the plane hit the runway, and the tail section broke off immediately. The landing gear essentially gets flattened and disintegrates, and the rest of the plane bounces multiple times. And as it's bouncing, it's breaking more, there's more points of failure, and it starts spewing out more fuel onto the runway, which also bursts into flames. On the final bounce, the right wing rips off the plane entirely. The body turns sideways, so it's no longer like a tube moving forward on the runway. It's now sideways like a car drifting that actually has no momentum that's going in a circle. Mm-hmm. And it heads off the runway at this point. It winds up pitching up to the point where people thought when they witnessed it that it tumbled end over end.
Oh,
but
wow.
A review of it stated that it didn't. It just looked that way because when it twisted and then tumbled upright and then the wing ripped off, it just looked like it did that.
Ah, okay.
But from what they can tell, that's not actually what happened, but it winds up slowing to a rest in a nearby cornfield upside down. I have a picture of this. So there'll be pictures of the crash aftermath, which are kind of hard to look at, but just bear with me here. So like I mentioned, there's 296 souls aboard Flight 232. 285 of them are passengers. 35 people died from smoke inhalation. They survived the crash. And when this part of the plane burst into flames, it billowed smoke up into their section, which was inverted, upside down at this point.
Oh, that sucks.
And they couldn't escape. Of the 35 that died from inhaling smoke, 24 of them had 0 blunt force injuries. They completely survived that crash.
It
was the smoke that killed them.
Yeah.
It was the fire and the smoke that killed them, which is horrifying to think about. In addition to that, here's a really sad part. And for those of you who don't like the sad stuff, you might want to skip forward about 30 seconds. So July 19th, 1989 wasn't just the day this crash happened. It was also United Airlines promotional day known as Children's Day, which allowed kids to fly for 1 penny. So there were 52 children and 8 infants on board. 11 of them died. A lot of these kids were actually flying alone because that used to be pretty standard practice. Mm-hmm. And I think 5 of these kids were lap passengers where you could just sit in the lap of your parent if you were small enough.
Oh, that sucks.
1 of them died. This led to a big debate after this crash.
Should that be allowed anymore?
Should that be allowed at all? It's been enforced and then repealed multiple times. We don't have to get into it. Another 66 individuals died from the crash as well, bringing the death total to 112. And as sad and heartbreaking as that is, that means 184 people survived this crash. This crash where I've seen this video. The reason I'm covering this topic is because I saw the video of the crash online and thought to myself, I just watched an entire plane of people die. And then I showed it to Robin. And then we went into the comments and people talked about how this was essentially a fucking miracle. And then more people talked about how it wasn't a miracle. It was the pilots and this fucking dude named Fitch who showed up in that cockpit that made it so that 184 people could survive the crash. It is insane to see a plane touch down, break apart, burst into flames. And when you can't imagine a single person surviving something, then you realize 62% of the passengers lived. That's more than Top Gun, folks. Just saying. Sorry, Goose.
Oh, no.
The fire crews responded and got as many people off the plane while it was still on fire and smoldering as possible. So they are definitely to credit for the fact that a lot of these people survived this crash. It took until 4:35 p.m., 35 minutes after the plane crashed and exploded on impact, to even identify the debris that was the cockpit. And once they figured out, oh fuck, that's the cockpit that broke off the plane, they opened it and discovered Al, Bill, Dudley, and Fitch, all of whom were alive.
Oh my god!
All 4 of them survived.
Shut up.
These 4 guys are absolute fucking legends. They saved 184 people's lives, including their own, and every single one of them made a full recovery and returned to active flight duty.
Wow.
Can you imagine getting into a fucking plane and flying again after going through all that? It is fucking crazy. Fitch, when he was controlling the throttle and they were on the thing, like you can check the air traffic control reports, they were basically going through, like, the people in the air traffic control tower were freaking the fuck out. And Fitch is like, when we land, we'll all get a beer after this.
No way.
And one of the pilots told him straight up, like, I do not drink, but I'll get a beer with you after this if we land. And word is, legend has it, they had a beer together once they recovered. So this simulation of this event has been run since. Obviously being done a ton more around the time it happened. And according to the internet, which never lies, not a single person has ever managed to make it to the fucking runway, let alone even attempt a landing. And each attempt in the simulation to recreate this flight path and what they're able to do to prevent the loss of life of everyone on board has resulted in the simulator with a crash and a complete loss of life across the board.
Wow. It
has never once been done in a simulator. Again, this is the internet. I don't run simulator statistics. I can't really tell that, but it seems to be the legend of how this all shook out. So the thought of losing an engine and having total hydraulic failure at 36,000 feet in the air is probably one of the scariest thoughts I could imagine. And I would imagine it's not much different for anyone else who's ever flown in a plane, or even if not, just seeing what a plane is. Thing like being that high up and all of a sudden your fucking plane just stops working. It's really, really scary. And despite the fact that this story 100% fits the theme of Scaryish, the fact that anyone survived this crash is a goddamn miracle. It is crazy. And that, my spooky friends, is the story of United Airlines Flight 232.
Nice. I mean, I hope any flight we go on, the pilots are half as talented.
The fact that the dude who knew what to do was a goddamn passenger
who
just
lucky.
Got in there and was just like, guys, I think I can help with this. It's so lucky. It's insane. Yeah. There's a map that, and I know a lot of people think like, oh, I wonder like which seats are more likely to survive in a crash. Mm-hmm. And I read through that and it basically just depends on what your crash is like. In this case, just about everyone in first class died because the fuselage that ran under first class erupted. Anyone in front of the wings and behind first class, almost everyone in the main section of the cabin survived.
Oh, wow.
And nearly everyone in the tail died. There was one dude, the one unaccounted for that they had when they were counting up the death toll. They're like, someone was in this seat that was in the middle. It was in like the very back middle in a section where everyone survived. And they couldn't find him.
Was he in the restroom?
And I think all the crew survived, by the way. And one of the flight attendants was like, he switched seats.
Oh, no.
He volunteered to switch seats, and he went and sat somewhere else in the back. So, or it's like...
Oh, that's so sad.
I think his girlfriend might have been traveling, is something that I read online, too, and he wanted to sit next to her. And so that seat swap cost him his life and saved someone else's.
Makes you wonder if you should really swap seats, huh?
Yeah, because it might save your life, but it might cost you yours. So I saw that, and I was like, that's so fucked up. So of all the injuries that were sustained, I think they said only one person that got off the plane wound up dying in the hospital later, but I that might be untrue. But yeah, the death toll was shockingly low for something so horrific. And I was just like, I have to share this on the show. So
it's really cool.
I hope you all enjoyed it, and I hope it was a bit of an uplifting tragedy, if one such thing exists, before we get into Robin's script of mayhem.
Yeah.
So, cool. Before we get into Robin's topic, though, we're going to take a quick commercial break.
All right, welcome to my half of the episode. It is not necessarily chaos, it's just really, sad.
Okay.
It's very sad. Okay. So, true crime week for me this week. And there's just nothing like the horrible dark side of humanity to get your brain gears working. I know sometimes you just want to sit there and have your earbuds in at work or something. You just want to listen to some true crime and how someone got murdered, and it's morbid curiosity, right? People are just interested to see how the human brain works and why people do what they do. Sometimes there's no reasoning. Sometimes people are awful and you just never know why.
When I saw the chart, the breakdown of like how people died in my topic, I was like, is this too morbid? And I was like, no, people listen to this show and other shows of its ilk because they are morbidly curious. So I was just like, I'm going to include that breakdown because that's just something that is an interest of mine, and I figure is an interest of yours as well.
Yeah. So I say that, but there's a lot of this topic that I cut out because it's just more gruesome details that you don't necessarily need to know because a lot of shitty stuff happens.
You get to judge what I need to know, Robin.
This tale is a really dark one.
Once we get to the end, I'll probably be like, thank you so much for taking the stuff out that I never want to know what I missed out on.
Yeah. It's a tale of abuse, torture, murder. So if that's not for you, maybe you can just leave it off.
You don't have to act like it is for us if we want to listen. It's not like we're all like taking our pants off. It's like,
but yeah, so trigger warning before you get really deep into this one. But that being said, if you're this deep into the podcast, you may have heard worse by now. I don't know. If you're starting at this end, welcome. You're in for a morbid, horrific little treat. So this topic for me this week is about Sylvia Marie Likens, and she was born January 3rd, 1949. So this isn't too long ago, but it's not very recent either.
My dad was going to be born in 6 years, so kind of a long time ago. My grandfather, though, who is very much still alive, was like in his 20s.
Didn't he live through both World Wars?
He was born right after World War I ended.
Okay.
So that he was in like fresh prime condition to be sent over for World War II.
Oh, okay. So she's born in 1949. 1949 saw the publishing of George Orwell's 1984. The establishment of NATO. That was 1949. And the Berlin blockade came to an end. So,
wow, lots of interesting facts.
Historical facts, I suppose. I mean, the 40s saw a lot of shit.
Oh, dude. The 40s was quite eventful.
Yeah. So she was the third of 5 children born to a pair of carnival workers, Lester Cecile Likens and his wife Elizabeth Betty Francis. So her older and younger siblings were sets of fraternal twins.
So not only was she a middle child, she was a super middle child.
Yeah, because I think her older siblings, it was like 1 girl, 1 boy. Younger siblings, 1 girl, 1 boy. And they were twins. So I would love that if I could have fraternal twins, 1 boy, 1 girl, 1 shot, be done with it. As with many a true crime tale, someone happens to have parents that weren't the happiest or stable. And in this story, it's Sylvia. Her parents sold candy, beer, and soda at carnival stands around Indiana during the summer. So it wasn't something where she was in one place, where you grow up in one city, one town. And
right. I mean, there's a lot of people out there who are like military brats who like are spread all over the country and like, 4 years, 4 high schools type of thing.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's abnormal. That's the thing though. It is hard. That's what I've always heard from military brats is like, it's difficult.
Yeah. Because you're never in one place for very long. Your friends are constantly changing because you're only there for a couple years. It's just rough. So this is kind of their life, right? Their parents are always on the move. You can imagine that they didn't live this life of wealth and luxury. It was a struggle. Their parents were always
candy and beer.
Their parents were always trying to make money. The sons that they had they were made to travel so that they could also make money and assist in, providing for the family. The girls, at least Sylvia and Jenny, which were the younger girls, didn't. They wanted these girls to stay put, get an education, try to live a normal life.
Okay.
So Sylvia and Jenny, the youngest girls, they often stayed with relatives like their grandmother or something like that. As she got older, Sylvia began making money by babysitting, doing small errands on the side, typical teenage side gigs. She would give her mother a portion of the money that she made because she is also trying to help out. She was described as having been friendly, charismatic. Her nickname was Cookie. So her friends liked her. She was cute. She was protective of her more insecure younger sister, Jenny, because Jenny actually had suffered from polio. So she had one leg that was weaker than the other.
Because polio was a thing back then.
You don't really hear about it now, but...
Thank Jonas Salk, people. Thank Jonas Salk.
But her younger sister had to wear a brace. So she limped and had to wear a brace. So she's obviously more insecure because she has these differences.
Right.
Sylvia was the type of sister to hold her hand while she was skating. Like she took care of her. Despite her seemingly outgoing personality, though, she would never open mouth smile and show her teeth because she had actually lost a tooth while roughhousing with one of her brothers when she was younger, which is totally unfortunate. And when you're younger, you can lose your baby tooth, right? And you have another one that grows back. But it must have been after that had happened.
I was going to say, it had to be.
I think I've said this story on the podcast before, but definitely ate shit and had one of my adult teeth, break in half. So
is that when you locked your knees and then you passed out?
I passed out. My mom freaked the fuck out. Anyway, June of 1965... Sylvia and Jenny were with their parents in Indianapolis. July 3rd, their mom was arrested for shoplifting.
Oh, shit.
So their dad decides to have the girls board with this woman named Gertrude Benezuski. And she herself had 2 girls that were sisters and were friends with these sisters from their high school.
So it's like, go stay with your friend's mom for this time.
Yeah.
Basically.
So the girls move in with her while their dad goes off to try to make money, and eventually their mom goes too. But their dad pays this woman $20 a week for their care.
Are you going to give us an adjustment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So he and their mom eventually both go to the East Coast with a carnival to try to make money. It was planned that they would return for their girls in November. That was their plan. They were going to go work, come back, pick them up in November. Everything started fine. All 4 girls would go to Sunday school, and the pastor even commended Sylvia for her piety, which is a good sign when you're in church, I guess. Gertrude, though, was something else entirely.
Oh, no.
She was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, September 19th, 1928.
Why did you look at me like that when you said Indiana? Like it was my fault. That was so weird. Indianapolis, Indiana. Like, what the fuck?
That's where he's from. I'm just saying. She was 3rd of 6 kids. She dropped out of high school when she was 16. Married a guy named John. They had 4 kids together, despite the occasional bout of domestic abuse. They stayed together for 10 years before they're divorced. She goes on to marry someone, but their marriage only lasts 3 months. She goes back to marry John.
Okay. So she left John, got married for a quarter of a year.
Yeah.
And then came back to
So
John.
she marries John again. They have another 2 kids. Then they divorce again in 1963. So altogether, they're together about 24 years.
Okay.
And I say about because I don't know how much time really in between they were apart or anything like that. So 3 weeks after their divorce, she's 35 years old. She starts seeing this guy named Dennis Lee Wright. He's 20.
Oh, wow.
He's a 20-year-old. So, cougar status, right? He also abuses her, but they end up having a child together.
Damn, man.
He abandons them shortly after she gives birth to that child in May of 1964. So 1965 comes around. Gertrude is a single mother of 7 children.
Holy shit.
But by this point, her oldest, Paula, is 17, and Stephanie is 15. So these are the 2 girls that are similar ages to Sylvia and Jenny.
Gotcha. Okay.
So they hang out. So it's the perfect age to get these kids to kind of get along, right? Gertrude was severely underweight. People described her as chain smoker with clinical depression. John, the original father of her, most of her kids, right? He still checks in on them every once in a while and helps financially support her and the children. He's not the worst guy. He's just an abuser, which is immediate red flag. Fuck that. If you hit me once, I'll murder you. And so Gertrude also does the odd job here and there to earn money. Where she lived at the time, the rent was only $55. The rent was $55. That's the equivalent of today's $541.84.
Even adjusted for inflation, that just tells you how much bullshit rent is nowadays.
So her rent was a little over $500. Let's say it was like $550, okay? Approximately. After doing a little Zillow snooping of the area that she lived in, because we know what address it was at.
Okay.
So I did a little snooping, and I can say that rent in that area now is 2 to 3 times that.
Okay.
So it's about $1,000 to $1,500. The school districts for the area are currently ranked 5 and below out of 10.
I was like, isn't 5 out of 5 good?
No. 5 and below out of 10. So I think the middle schools are at a 5, and then elementary school's a 2, and the high school's a 2.
Okay.
So it's rough. The area is rough. So take that as you like. She probably wasn't living in the best conditions, not the best area at all. So Gertrude, she's being paid $20 a week. Her monthly rent is $55.
Right. That's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. Not for the rent, what she's getting paid for the girls. So she was supposed to be at least getting paid $20 a week. But after a couple weeks, payments started coming late. And I'm not saying they were coming like a week late or anything. It'd be like 1 or 2 days later, something like that. But payments started coming late. And instead of being an adult about it, she took her anger out on the girls.
Let me just really quickly. So she's getting $20 a week.
Mm-hmm.
Her rent is due monthly. I'm assuming like most rent is.
Uh-huh.
So she would have been making $80 over the course of 4 weeks just to watch these girls, but which would have been more than enough to pay her rent and then have additional things.
But you also have to think about she has 7 children of her own.
I get that. But what I'm saying is like this is a fuck ton of money that she would be getting from these people to watch their kids, obviously, which is a very big responsibility. But rent coming in, or not rent, but the payments coming in a little bit late, immediately jumping to now I abuse their children is fucking crazy.
Yeah, but these houses are tiny. These houses are so small, and she has 9 kids.
9? Oh, with the
7
additional
plus
2.
2.
Gotcha.
And they're not little kids. They're teenagers.
Yep, that checks out.
They're teenagers. So, you know, people take a lot of space. People take up a lot of food. I'm sure part of that is why she was a little bit stressed out, but she really took it out on these kids, and she would spank them and yell at them, stating that she was taking care of them for nothing. She was just awful to these girls. In late August, both girls were beaten 15 times on the back with a 1/4-inch paddle for being accused of eating too much food at a church dinner.
Wow.
She was just off the rails. By mid-August, most of the abuse was aimed at Sylvia, supposedly out of jealousy for what she had. She was young. She had a bright future ahead of her. People liked her. It was just, it was like Gertrude really was taking things out on her.
Right.
So she would starve Sylvia and abuse her. She would force her to eat spoiled food out of trash cans.
Oh my God.
She even accused her of stealing candy that Sylvia had bought herself. It was just a mess. So when Sylvia began talking about having a boyfriend in Long Beach, which is on the complete opposite side of the country from where they're living at that point, Gertrude got really weird about it. So Sylvia was this innocent girl. She didn't really know too much about, you know, being sexually active, okay? But Gertrude really twisted everything that she would say. So she would keep bringing up the topic of, did you ever do anything with a boy? Like, really creepy. And she kept bringing up this topic. Eventually, Sylvia did say, like, she laid under the covers with a boy once. And so Gertrude started telling her that her stomach was getting bigger, like she was going to have a baby.
Wow.
Like, she was really creepy. And I can't even imagine a stranger talking to my child like that. I'd be like, you are never going to come within any vicinity of my child ever again. So Sylvia thought what she was saying was a joke, but Gertrude took this as an opportunity to starve her.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So she would tell all the girls that anytime they did anything with a boy, they would be sure to have a baby, that they would get pregnant. It's like she hated her own situation so much that she took it out on Sylvia. And she would kick her and attack her. Paula, her oldest daughter, who was actually 3 months pregnant at the time, was also jealous of her and started kicking and abusing her too. And they would push her off her chair onto the floor and say things like, you ain't fit to sit in a chair, stuff like that. I don't know how they talk in Indiana, but
it's not right, but it's okay. Keep going.
Anyway, Sylvia was just abused by, I'm making a joke. They talk like normal people. Adam's from there. And you know what I mean. Anyway.
I will talk funny.
I'm from Texas. Okay. I hear.
We've heard your y'all.
Yeah.
We know.
I mean, I'm born in Texas. I'm not necessarily from Texas. I feel like I'm more like West Coast, you know? Do I have a West Coast accent?
You just like claiming you're from wherever suits you at the moment.
So Sylvia was just abused by all these other people around her. It wasn't just Gertrude and her family. There would be kids from their high school that would beat her up. One kid force-fed her like an overloaded hot dog that she had to throw up because they like shoved it down her throat.
Jesus Christ.
One time, Paula beat her so badly in the face with so much force that Paula broke her own wrist.
Wow.
And so she later used her arm that got put in a cast to beat her too. Like, this chick was awful. Gertrude would try to get Jenny, her younger sister, to beat her. And if she didn't, she would beat Jenny. So all this whole thing is just sick and twisted. Other kids used her as a dummy during judo sessions, like kids in the neighborhood.
What the fuck, dude?
They would like put cigarettes out on her. That's how awful this girl's life was.
I've not studied in the way of judo, but that doesn't sound like judo to me.
No, but I'm saying these people would do this. Eventually, Gertrude kept Sylvia from going to school. She was like, you're not going to school anymore. There's things that are part of this story about keeping her from school, things that she said, but it's all a lot. There's just a lot of gross, horrible things Gertrude would say. A lot of it revolving around, promiscuity and things like that. I think she really was just taking out things she hated about herself on Sylvia.
Right.
And it's just really sad. Even her own daughter, Stephanie, the one younger than Paula, would yell at her mother during these beatings and attacks that Sylvia didn't even do anything. She would be telling her mom like she didn't do anything, but it didn't stop her. The beatings were near constant. The poor girls were just living horrible lives, and they didn't want to say anything to anyone. And that's the case with a lot of things that happen, when people are assaulted, they don't want to say anything because either they're ashamed of themselves
or they think it's going to get worse.
Yes. And so that's the case here. They didn't want to say anything because they didn't want anything to get worse. They've already seen like, well, if I try and take this at school, then kids at school start beating them. And it's just this whole thing where they just don't want to make it worse. So their parents visit in July and August when they can, but the last time that they would visit them is October 5th. So the girls act like nothing's wrong during this visit, but Gertrude and her children are there. What are they going to do? They can't say anything to their parents because they're afraid that they're just going to go straight back into more abuse and stuff like that. But it doesn't help. Like, their parents leave and things continue, When the girls meet their older sister, Diana, the older girl from the twin set, they randomly meet her in a park in September. They tell her everything that's going on. Diana thinks that they're just exaggerating about their situation. But then she goes to visit them October 1st. Gertrude refuses to let Diana in to see her sisters. She says that Diana needs to get permission from their parents in order to see her sisters.
That makes zero sense.
Yeah. So when people start reporting Sylvia's horrible condition, despite, the school nurse looking into it and things like that, Gertrude just lies. Neighbors are noticing there's this girl that has injuries and stuff at her house, but nothing comes of it. Gertrude.
I'm not on the best terms with my brother, But if he told me something like this was wrong and I went to the place that he was staying at to check in on it and they're like, you're not allowed to see your brother, I'd be like, here's the deal, man. Like, I will burn this fucking house to the ground if you do not let me in.
So Gertrude would lie and say things like, Sylvia was an awful kid. She was out of control. She was dirty. She would say she was like a bad influence on her children and her sister. And because of everything that Gertrude was saying, people just let it go. Some neighbors, though, they knew something just wasn't right. But it didn't mean that they actually did anything about it, which reminds me of the case that I think I covered before about that person that gets murdered in front of all those people that didn't do anything at the apartment. Like, she or he is, like, getting stabbed and murdered, and everyone can hear it, and they're not doing anything about it.
We've covered so much horrific shit. My mind immediately went to the one overseas, I think in Japan, where the girl, like, slowly withered away and died. Yeah. Like, that one was what popped in my head, and, like, everyone knew something was wrong, but no one did anything about it either.
Yeah. So when Diana asks Jenny about Sylvia 2 weeks after that first attempt at visiting, Jenny tells her, I can't tell you or I'll get in trouble. That's how scared these kids are about all of this. And so I feel like Diana should have done more, but I'm not blaming her or anything. You don't know, but things just kept getting worse for poor Sylvia. She was denied access to a bathroom. She was forced to like soil herself. By October 6th, she was being locked in the basement and tied up. She didn't have clothes. She rarely got food or water. So she's just withering away at that point. And Gertrude was the absolute worst. She would lie and say horrible things about Sylvia, trying to get the other kids to attack her too. She even charged neighborhood kids 5 cents to see Sylvia and add to the abuse. She would fill a bathtub with scalding water and put her in it and then rub salt in her wounds.
What the fuck?
Yeah, this person was awful. There is so much more disgusting crap, which is saying a lot considering all the stuff I've already said that she's gone through thus far. There's a lot of physical and mental anguish. This poor girl, like, they did things that are just not necessarily unspeakable. They're just something that it's disgusting and awful. And if you really want to learn about it, you can look it up. But I am going to save your ears and just tell you that Gertrude was some of the worst of humanity and drug all these other people into her web of evil, which is just
I have no sympathy
awful
for any of the people that got drug in there. They willingly went in there knowing the thing that they were doing was horrific.
Yeah.
And they're pieces of shit that should burn in hell.
Yeah. So she would taunt Sylvia after all this with things like, what are you going to do now? You can't get married now because she's being abused like this and mutilated and just awful, you know? There's obviously something deeply broken in Gertrude, like something about hating her own life or her own situation, or she like regrets decisions she's made and is taking it out on her because maybe she sees herself in her or something. She eventually breaks Sylvia too. And by late October, there's a point where she tells her sister Jenny that she was going to die, that she could tell that she was going to die. And one day, Gertrude wakes her up, forces her to write a letter stating that she was running away, framing a group of local boys for her abuse and all this stuff. A bunch of horrible crap that she made her write word for word, you know? And this woman has this odd obsession with sexuality. Like, she really is taking all these issues that she has with herself out on others. And she had this plan about what to do with her. They were going to leave her to die, like take her to the woods and leave her to die. So on October 25th, she attempts to escape the basement after hearing this plan on how they were going to take her to the woods and leave her there. She was too weak at this point to actually get very far. So they catch her and drag her back to the basement. And despite all the screams and attempts at telling others, like she's banging on the walls and stuff like that, trying to get help, Gertrude goes to the police and lies to them and says, like, I heard screaming in the middle of the night and it was from this house. And she lies to these people to get the focus off of her. By the next morning, Sylvia can barely speak. She's delirious. She's unable to recite past the first 4 letters of the alphabet. That's how messed up she was. She kept getting physically beaten and abused, and she really didn't have that much left in her. Gertrude's daughter, Stephanie, was the only one, I feel like, out of all her kids that felt at least a little bad for what was going on. And so supposedly, while she's holding her at one point, she's like crying over her because she can't stand seeing how she is. So she and her brother Richard, they bathe her, they put her in new clothes. Sylvia says that while she's laying there, she's saying that she wishes her dad was there. Stephanie thinks that by her talking and saying these things, that it's a sign that she's going to get better. But she passes away. So she passes away. She's only 16. And Gertrude, after she dies, keeps yelling at her that she's faking it, that she's not actually dead.
Because she's insane. This woman is completely crazy.
Well, we'll get to that later. But she's like beating her with a book and telling her to like get up. That's how insane this situation is. Police are called. She gives them the note that she forced Sylvia to write. All the children are forced to lie, even Jenny. But Jenny leans into a police officer and whispers, "You got to get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." So they get her out of there. She makes a formal statement that gets the family arrested within hours of the discovery of the body. A number of neighborhood kids who participated were also arrested.
Good.
And I say kids, but I mean teenagers. Some kids were arrested. Some kids were placed in juvie. Gertrude initially denies everything, then later confessed that she knew her kids were doing it. She eventually admits that she put her in the basement. When questioned further about how much abuse there was and all these things that they found on her, she couldn't excuse her way out of it. She just stopped talking, Her daughter Paula, the one that had been pregnant at the time, showed no remorse. She's a total monster. She signs a statement admitting to her involvement. So did Gertrude's son, John Jr., named after her first husband.
Right.
The autopsy shows an excess of 150 separate wounds on her whole body. All were at differing stages of healing. She also had extensive muscle and nerve damage. All her nails were broken backwards.
Jesus Christ.
Her death was listed as a subdural hematoma from a blow to her right temple, but her main suffering, like everything that was wrong with her body, was from prolonged damage and severe malnutrition. And based on rigor mortis, it was determined that she'd actually been dead 8 hours before police arrived.
Wow.
So it could be because they bathed her after she died or something like that, that causes that time of death to be different. But she had a full funeral service. She's buried in Lebanon, Indiana.
Wow.
Her headstone is inscribed with "Our darling daughter," which is so sad. The whole situation really is so sad. On December 30th, 1965, Gertrude, Paula, and John Jr. are indicted with first-degree murder. There were others, too, that were part of this trial. And if you want to know more about the names of those people that were a part of the trial, you can look it up. There's so much. This episode's really long already. But there really is a lot to this trial, a lot of testimony, things like that. Stephanie, her own daughter, testified against her family and all the other individuals involved. All 3 members of the family were found mentally competent to stand trial. They had a psychologist come in, check them all out. They were found to be competent, so they went to trial.
I mean, they weren't insane. They were just demons.
Yeah.
They're horrific human beings.
So the trial started in April of 1966. Deliberation was on May 19th, 1966. It took 8 hours.
Yeah.
Gertrude was found guilty of first-degree murder. Paula was second-degree murder. And Gertrude's son, John, was manslaughter. So Gertrude and Paula, they both get life in prison. John gets like somewhere between 2 and 21 years or something.
That's a pretty big range.
They eventually the mother and daughter go to retrial in 1970, where Paula pleads guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She gets released December of 1972.
That's horseshit.
Gertrude's conviction stays. She is let out on parole in 1985. I think it's probably a good point to tell you guys, anybody in a different country or something like that, life in prison here doesn't mean your whole life. It's a range from 15 to 40 years, depending on however many, life sentences or whatever that you end up getting.
I think each state handles it differently too.
So when released, she describes herself as a devout Christian and stated that she wished the death could be undone, but really it's too late. You freaking killed someone, you know? She relocates to Iowa. She eventually dies from lung cancer on June 16th, 1990. She grows to be 61 years old. And some abusers involved ended up being counselors, like either school counselors or teachers, or some were members of religious entities that worked with children, which was so upsetting for me because they killed a kid and now they're growing up to work with kids.
Yeah, they participated in abuse that they knew was horrific and should not be done, had no consequences except for the ones that had minor ones.
Yeah, I don't think they shouldn't have the right to work with children after something like that, you know? It's just, ugh.
It's sickening.
It really is. Some other people died of cancer or diabetes. And the house that this all happened in was demolished in 2009 and is now a church parking lot. The house was abandoned for a while and people were trying to figure out like what they wanted to do with it. But it is a parking lot. And Sylvia's death is credited with the adoption of Indiana's mandated reporter law. So if you suspect any child abuse, you have the legal obligation to have to report it.
Right.
Then there's the Sylvia's Child Advocacy Center that is dedicated to her memory as well. And that's in Lebanon, Indiana. But yeah, this whole story is absolutely awful. I'm glad there's laws that are put in place now so that those people that chose to ignore it should have said something.
Yeah, and they should face consequences because it's like, if you're seeing something, if you see something and you're like, I'm not quite sure what that was, I should mind my own business. That's different than consistently seeing someone withering away and enduring horrific abuse and looking the other way. And it's cowardly and it's just horrific to think that this person could have survived this had more people, since apparently there was just like her little sister who was trying to avoid dying herself and the one daughter of Gertrude cared in any way, shape, or form. Or had the courage to go to a police, and be like, hey, this is happening. Like, you can show up at my house right now and you will find a girl chained in the basement. And I get it, like, the whole, like, obey authority, obey your parents, obey the people that have power over you. I have never had any sort of respect for anyone who would be very obviously a bad person, even if they were older than me. And it's just like the idea that so many people could have just tried and done just slightly more to prevent this horrific loss of life. I mean, it's so tragic and so sad. There's no wonder that it has so many things that have spawned off of it, like the different laws that have come into place. But it is a very harrowing story, to be sure. So,
yeah. So, hopefully this was interesting for you guys. It was definitely heartbreaking for me when I was researching all of it. But yeah, True Crime Week, y'all.
Yeah, so there you go. Fun episode, everyone. We hope you enjoyed it.
I don't think it's fun, but I think it's interesting, and I think some of these cases deserve to be talked about because this girl did die, and I think it's,
talking about it is really more of a reflection of the fact that you should know, even if it's not as vividly detailed as it could be, that this person suffered, this person had a life, and they went through, endured a horrible hardship, It's not to glorify or, try and hype up the criminal or the person who perpetrated the extremely horrific act. Like, that's not what true crime fascination's about. It's really about finding out, like, the lives and stories of the victims that go through this stuff. And sometimes it tends to be a bit on the horrific side, like this one was, but you covered it very well. It was incredibly intriguing and interesting in the most morbid of ways, but you nailed it. So
thanks.
Good job. That's everything we have for episode 290 of Scaryish. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you. If anyone would like to send in a story of stuff that's happened in your life, a friend, a family member's life that is, paranormal, supernatural, spiritual, coincidental, extraterrestrial, or true crime in nature, does not have to be related to the topics we covered today, obviously. And hopefully not when it comes to Robin's topic, because that would just be fucking crazy. But please email storytime@scaryish.com or go to our website, scaryish.com. Click on Contact Us, fill out the form. It does come directly to us, or you can hit us up on our social medias. Facebook is facebook.com/scaryish podcast. Twitter, I'll never call it X, go fuck yourself, Elon, is @scaryish pod, and Instagram is @scaryish podcast. For folks who would like to donate to us, Robin, how can they do so?
You can go to patreon.com/Scaryish podcast. Those are monthly donations with tiers starting at $8. You can also go to coffee, ko-fi.com/Scaryish podcast. And all your donations really help us keep this show on the road. Well, not literally on the road, but like it keeps us going.
It does keep us going, and we appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you, everyone, for sharing and engaging with us on social media. So many of you folks reach out and just make comments on our posts and stuff like that, and it's always so much fun.
Yeah, I've been posting a lot of the dog lately on our Instagram.
I will send her videos of the dog being adorable, waiting for her to send me a reaction, like, "Oh, that's so cute," and I get nothing from her. And then I start seeing comments being posted on our Instagram because she took my video and posted it, and I'm just like, "Cool, I guess you liked it then, huh?"
So if you guys want to check out, we'll put like videos of our dog or whatever our dogs. We have multiple or whatever we're doing at the time. You'll probably see a bunch of stuff for when we are in Miami Miami.
Prepare next week to get some stuff with F1 on it.
Oh yeah, so much F1 stuff. But yeah, thank you guys so much for sticking around with us. Hopefully this episode wasn't too long. And you guys will be with us for the next one.
Indeed. Robin, do your thing and go ahead and sign us out.
Keep on creeping on. We'll talk to you guys later.
Bye-bye.